Scared for reals.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
And we're here upon the 50th anniversary of The Wicker Man, one of my all-time favorite movies. And how does it rank with you, Adam?
It's definitely a classic.
Yes.
Definitely something we all know about and have at least seen once or twice.
Right. Some way more than that.
Yeah.
So we got to go back to 1967. Anthony Schaffer, the guy who wrote the screenplay for The Wicker Man, actually read this novel called Ritual. It was penned by David Pinner. And you got this devout Christian policeman. He's called to investigate what appears to be the ritual murder of a young girl, rural village, and decided that it would serve well as the source material for this project they were thinking of. But I know Pinner originally wrote this as a film treatment, but with a different filmmaker in mind, Michael Winner. And believe it or not, Michael Winner had John Hurt in mind.
Oh, wow.
For the role as the star of but Winner eventually declined to do it. So Pinner's agent persuaded him to write Ritual as a novel instead. So it was supposed to be a screenplay, and then it was almost like it was destined for bigger things. So apparently Anthony Schaffer really loved the novel, and he actually, him and Christopher Lee both paid £15,000, which is equivalent to £226,000 in 2021 for the rights. And Schaffer set to work on the screenplay, and he soon decided that a direct adaptation would not work well, so he drafted a new story based only loosely on the story of the novel. So you got the basic plot. The Christian police guy trying to find a missing girl, and he thinks it was a ritual murder as well, but that's pretty much the only similarities.
Yeah.
And so in the early 1970s, Christopher Lee, he was a Hammer horror regular playing Dracula, and I mean, he broke because of The Curse of Frankenstein, and, Christopher Lee, Boris Karloff was very comfortable. He loved doing those type of roles, but Christopher Lee wanted to do something different. He was getting kind of tired of doing the same old. So the idea for the Wicker Man film actually began in 1971 when Christopher Lee met with Anthony Schaffer, and they agreed to work together. So they bought the rights to the novel. And then film director Robin Hardy and British Lionhead Peter Snell became involved in the project. Now, Robin Hardy had never made a movie before, so Schaffer had a series of conversations with Robin Hardy, and the two decided that making a horror film centering on old religion would be fun. In sharp contrast,
it's a blast.
Yeah, it's a they actually described it. Listening to the commentary, some of it they describe as a dark comedy. The Wicker Man.
I could see that.
Some of it.
I can see that a little bit.
Until the ending kind of just like rips away all of the comedy aspect of it.
Oh, yeah. Spoiler. No happy endings here.
Yeah. We're gonna be talking about all aspects of The Wicker Man. So spoiler alerts. If you haven't seen any cuts of the film, do yourself a favor, watch it. It really doesn't matter what cut you have access to. You really need to see this. This is like an essential viewing. Definitely essential, and it doesn't matter if you like horror movies or not. There's a lot more to this than just a typical horror movie. Also, do yourself a favor and do not watch the Nicolas Cage version. Oh, we'll talk a little bit about that garbage later on. But so the two, you got Anthony Schaffer, who wrote the screenplay, Robin Hardy, who ended up directing it. They had they wanted to make a different type of movie. They loved the Hammer films. They used to watch them all the time. Mm-hmm. They noticed they followed a typical pattern, and I know they both wanted to, kind of change that.
It has a Hammer vibe to it.
It does. There are Hammer vibes throughout the whole movie, but there are other scenes that kind of contrast the Hammer thing. So they definitely were inspired by the Hammer films, and how could you not?
Right, exactly.
Terrence Fisher was like the top Hammer director. So they get to work, and it took them a while to write the screenplay, but I think it 18 months, if I remember the documentary I watched. There's a lot to this movie. But so they originally, the studio, Peter Snell and the studio they were involved with wanted Michael York to play the Howie, the policeman.
Oh, wow.
But Michael York declined, and then the obvious choice was Edward Woodard, who definitely hit it out of the park. Sure. But it seemed like Christopher Lee was always involved with this film, so he was always going to be Lord Summerisle, and it's his favorite role that he ever made. But so they're writing the script. Anthony Shaffer wanted the film to be a little more literate than the average horror movie. He specifically wanted a film with a minimum of violence and gore. I guess he was tired of seeing horror films that relied almost entirely on these gory tricks to be scary. And I mean, early 70s, Hammer did make, they were the first ones to use a lot of gore and blood in movies.
That was kind of their MO.
Yeah, and I mean, there was other movies in the early 70s that had a lot of violence and blood and gore. Now, the focus of the film was crystallized when he finally hit upon the abstract concept of sacrifice. The image of the Wicker Man, and I actually wrote down the definition of Wicker Man in my notes here, and Christopher Lee himself said it, sacrifices of the Druids was the meaning of the Wicker Man.
Huh.
The Druids, that dates back all the way back.
Oh, yeah.
But the image of the Wicker Man, which gave the filmmakers their title, was taken not from these pagan sacrifices, but actually the practice of human sacrifice by the Gauls in Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War. How about that? Julius Caesar.
Wow.
One of those paintings. Others have figures of vast size, the limbs of which formed of osiers, as is quoted here. They fill with living men, which being set on fire, the men perish enveloped in the flame. So it wasn't one guy like the movie, it was hundreds of men.
Yeah.
They put all their prisoners of war in there and then torched them. What a great image. But for Anthony Shaffer, this was the most alarming and imposing image that he had ever seen. The idea of a confrontation between a modern Christian and a remote pagan community continued to intrigue Shaffer, who performed painstakingly research on paganism. So there is a lot of research done. They had to dig deep into some of the especially the Scottish form of paganism. But he brainstormed, I think it was like one weekend, brainstormed with Hardy. They conceived the film as presenting the pagan elements objectively and accurately as they possibly could, accompanied by music that seemed authentic. A lot of music research, and actually, second viewing, I think it was the second time you watched it, right, Adam?
That I can remember.
Yes.
I mean, I watched it years and years and years ago, and I could have watched it a second time, but yeah, I watched it right before we recorded, and honestly, it starts and you think you're kind of watching a musical. Yeah, well, the song and dance in it.
It's funny that you say that because the studio had a hard time marketing this. They didn't know how to do it as a horror movie, as a drama, believe it or not, a drama, or a musical, because music is such an important factor in the movie. It speaks when the characters themselves are not speaking. Music is just it's like dialogue in the film, basically. So getting back, brainstorming with Robin Hardy, Anthony Shaffer conceived the film presenting the pagan elements. They did it very accurately. I mean, you could tell there was a lot of passion for this movie. So they had authentic music and a believable contemporary setting. Now, Christopher Lee talks about one of the main resources was The Golden Bow, a study of mythology and religion written by Scottish anthropologist James Fraser. Now, according to Christopher Lee, there's like 25 volumes to this Golden Bow. So,
yeah.
I mean, again, Christopher Lee, Anthony Shaffer, they're the ones that bought the rights. Without Christopher Lee, without Anthony Shaffer, the movie probably would never have been made. It's interesting. Anthony Shaffer, just a year before this, had success with the movie Sleuth with Laurence Olivier, Michael Caine. If you ever get a chance to watch that, it's definitely a game-like movie. They're trying to outduel each other, with different games and disguises. And it's interesting how this movie was constructed as a game, kind of.
A little bit,
playing.
yeah.
It's like a game between Christopher Lee and Edward Woodard the whole time. So yeah, they got the cast. It got Edward Woodard. I think he was one of the few people that actually got paid for this role.
Wow.
Most Britt Eklund, of course, got paid. She was like one of the most famous stars at that particular time. Her star was on the rise. She
was the sex symbol, right?
And that was the thing. Like, some guy asked Robin Hardy, "What made you cast Britt Eklund?" I mean, just look at her, he says.
Yeah.
Either 73 or 72, or maybe even 74. Britt Eklund was in The Man with the Golden Gun, and Christopher Lee happened to be in it. But I don't think they really share a lot of screen time in that one. Well, they didn't really share any screen time in The Wicker Man either.
Yeah.
The time frame of when this movie was made in the story, it's set end of April, early May, the coming of summer, but the actual shooting was done in November and December.
It had to have been cold.
Oh, Edward Woodard said, he goes, I was freezing, but I really didn't complain too much because I actually had a suit on, where Christopher Lee's wearing a kilt and a lot of the extras and
the girls are dancing around naked.
Yeah, I know. Thankfully, there was a fire in.
Yeah, they were jumping over.
It was a tough shoot, and they did it across like 25 locations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had to bring in a bunch of trees. The stones and all that stuff were actually fake. They looked real. I mean, that's a huge shout out to the set designer and the cinematographer, especially getting the lighting, because you couldn't tell it was late autumn when you were watching the movie. The actual sun, they got lucky with actually having some good sunny weather, but it didn't really warm things up too much. It's kind of like our Novembers and Decembers around here in upstate New York. Leghorn fishermen of the island were the extras. There's a lot of extras, like when he first lands, when Howie first lands, the dinghy brings him in. Most of those guys there's like only 2 literal actors. The rest were all like local fishermen at the time.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
It was shot in a town called Plockton, which is above the Highlands. Yeah, 4 days a week, the townspeople had to help them out. That was their culture. They only worked 4 days a week in that town. Which was interesting. And basically, Robin Hardy said the reason why we shot this movie in November and December is because that was when it was available. They're like, go shoot the movie. That's what they did. They didn't like, we got to wait for the weather to be a certain way. I mean, the guy had no clout. He had never directed a movie. Studio financed it, Peter Snell and all of them. And they basically had to stitch the island together with the architecture. Again, 25 locations were used, and they had to travel like every other day. Christopher Lee actually spent time in the Providence of Galloway during filmmaking. Some of the extras were part of the acting troupe. There were a lot of local acting troupes in some of these towns. So some of them were used as extras as well. And as we mentioned, Britt Eklund was cast for her looks by Peter Snell himself. She looked right for the part, but a lot of people debating on whether she actually did her own talking or they had to have her voice dubbed. Now, Robin Hardy says she actually did the Scottish accent well, and her voice is in the movie, but there's other people that are saying her voice was dubbed.
Really?
The singing was definitely dubbed.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, Annie Ross did the singing, and we talked the enticement, Willow's Dance, as the piece of music is called, The Last Temptation of Howie. Trying to seduce him through the walls, basically. There was a local model that was used as the double. They had to put on a blonde wig and everything, because I don't think she had a wig. But Annie Ross did the singing. And Christopher Lee said she was dubbed as well, and I think Edward Woodard alluded to the fact that her voice was dubbed. But Robin Hardy swears that was her voice, but I think he's in the minority on that one. We're going to talk about the different cuts after we talk about the filming and everything, but Christopher Lee, you remember that scene outside the pub hotel area there?
Yep.
Christopher Lee literally last minute had to memorize a Walt Whitman poem.
Oh, wow.
That whole thing with the snails and him talking, about religion and stuff, that was a Walt Whitman poem.
Interesting.
The theatrical version didn't have any of that in the movie. It was kind of tough. That's the version I saw that there was these other cuts. It was like a huge eye-opener. I mean, I don't know why you wanted to cut that to begin with. The music of the film in that is definitely boy turning into a man, losing his virginity. The original folk song, it was not appropriate to play in front of women. So Peter Giovanni, the guy who took it, rewrote it and everything like that. He had to make it a little more appealing for mass audiences. Because apparently the song was really raunchy. I don't have the lyrics in front of me, but apparently that's why they had to change that. But to me, it flowed so well. It said a lot. And if you have the right music in a movie, it speaks for itself. there was all the tension right there at the start between Lord Summerisle and Neil Howie, those two characters. Even though they're not like in the same scene together, there's a lot of tension that's built there. And if you cut that out, you can still understand what's going on in the theatrical 87-minute cut. But to me, it's so important to have these scenes in there. Some people actually think of Howie as the villain of the movie.
He can definitely come off that way.
Yeah, in a way.
I think by the end, it's clearly established that he isn't, as everything, the whole story plays itself out. But definitely at the beginning, especially watching it through a 2023 lens.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this was made in a different time, and religion was viewed certainly in a way different way than, it could be viewed now.
Yes.
He shows up and he's throwing around the hard Christian values. He's come across this basically cult of people living their own way. At first, it seems like they're doing no harm to anybody.
Right.
So it's like, well, what's up your ass, dude? So, pardon my language,
right.
but no really better way to put it.
Right.
And then you start to see how really messed up this cult is. And you see that he's actually is onto something. And then obviously it plays out the way it plays out.
But it's incredible how you watch it the first time, you view it a whole different way upon viewing it a second time. You see the clues that are there.
Yeah.
The hairs and they're totally manipulating the guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, we don't know who she is. It's all to play him.
Yeah.
And they play it so brilliantly.
They trap him,
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. My wife looks at it as the hotel owner, the pub owner, and his daughter actually are in their own way trying to save him. Because if he made love to Willow that night she enticed him, he wouldn't have been sacrificed. You could see him opening the door, shuts the door. But I mean, it's just a fascinating thing when you hear other people talk about it, because art is interpreted differently by everybody. Now, Edward Woodard thought of Howie following Jesus was the most important part of his life. And you could tell that the sermon and everything at the beginning of the movie, very important, and being a lawman was second. He was so obsessed with trying to find that girl, it's hard to say this guy's the bad guy, but he's totally insulting at first. Yeah. Like if I'm trying to sell somebody on being a follower of Christ, I would not have done what he did.
No.
I mean, there's no way you're going to convince, Christopher Lee's character, Lord Summerisle, his grandfather pretty much, made that island followers of all these pagan rituals that it was his grandfather that he was following the example of, the way he was going, the Bible thumping approach.
Yes.
Robin Hardy alluded to the fact that he was kind of going British patriarchy at the time. There was a little hint. Again, we were talking about political stuff that's kind of put into these horror films. But again, like we talked about, is The Wicker Man really a horror film? Some call it a folk horror film.
Yeah, very much so.
It started that craze. It's really hard to classify it, and maybe that's why the studio had a hard time with it. Talk a little more about the cast here. Diane Silencio, I think that's how you say her name. Her father was an Italian filmmaker, I think. She was married to Sean Connery.
Oh, wow.
And she divorced and would go on to marry Anthony Shaffer, the screenwriter of the movie.
Wow.
I guess they moved to Australia. They started a theater repertoire. I don't know if she's still alive. I know Anthony Shaffer passed away, I think about a decade ago. You have this movie that no one had ever seen anything like it before. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Michael Dealey was the guy tried to find a distributor. He worked for the studio. He couldn't find a distributor for it, and Christopher Lee apparently went with his wife, an agent, to see the 87-minute cut right there at the British Lion studio. And Michael Dealey wouldn't shake hands with Christopher Lee or his wife, which that stuck in Christopher Lee's mind. So Michael Dealey asked Christopher Lee what he thought of the movie, and Christopher Lee thought it was great, but the 87-minute version, he said there was a lot cut out. He was kind of shocked. He goes, it was still a great movie. And Michael Dealey just said it was one of the 10 worst films he had ever seen.
Wow.
Said that right. And Christopher Lee was just so upset with this. I mean, he took it personally. I mean, he literally poured his money into this movie, and he spent even more money. I guess it was a double bill. Don't Look Now, which we're going to talk about next time. Don't Look Now had a British release in November 18th. brilliant Nicholas Roeg film. Wicker Man was kind of stuffed in as a double bill with that movie. I mean, you have a 2-hour movie with Don't Look Now, and unfortunately, they cut The Wicker Man so it could be at the back end of a double bill, so it's less than 90 minutes.
Right.
And Christopher Lee was talking about all these great scenes of dialogue and things that were cut from the movie. He swears that there's more to this movie. They can't find it, though. So what the distributors did, British Lion Studio, I guess they sent the cut that you saw and a lot of other people saw for a while, the 99-minute version. Actually, it was 102 minutes. They sent that 102-minute cut over to Roger Corman. And Roger Corman loved the movie, obviously. It's definitely up his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Better than anything he's ever done, in my opinion. He made notes of things to cut, so they trimmed 3 minutes out of it. So it's 99 minutes. And then what happened to this movie? You got the 87-minute version, which everyone saw, and Christopher Lee really pleaded with critics to go see. And he literally paid for their seats at these theaters so he could get some critics kind of champion this movie. And the critics loved it. It wasn't seen by a lot of people. You were showing me the actual box office receipts when it was first released. Not many people saw it.
No. I mean when it barely made its money back.
Right. At the time.
Yeah.
We're stunned because I know for a fact it's one of the greatest films I've ever seen. And I'm glad the movie kind of aged like fine wine because everyone loves the movie now. And
well, I mean, it's a bona fide cult classic. I mean, everybody knows about it. And even to this day, like, you can still feel the Wicker Man's presence with like the Burning Man Festival every year.
Different parts of the United States, like in Nevada or something.
In Las Vegas. So I mean, like, it's there,
But they don't sacrifice a human being.
They don't sacrifice a human being.
They have like a structure just like the Wicker Man.
Yeah, that looks just like it.
Yeah,
and they burn it. It's a big bonfire.
Yeah,
and, everyone gets together, hang out, and have a good time.
Yeah,
kind of like they do in the Wicker Man. They're just sacrificing humans in the Wicker Man. No big deal. And
that's one thing we were talking about, how they didn't really want any gore, a minimum amount of gore. There's no gore in this movie. I literally, unless it was cut, one of the many cuts of the film, I didn't see one scene of violence. The only person who dies is Howie himself.
Right.
That's it.
Can you imagine being stuck inside of a 10-story structure like that and set on fire, and you just have to wait for it to be done?
And Edward Woodward's reaction was so legit because he had never seen it up until that point. He didn't see it himself. And his reaction is real.
Yeah.
And he's not taking the Lord's name in vain. He's praying because he's very devout. And that's the interesting thing about the movie is the fact that, Lord Summerisle literally says you can be a martyr, you can be among the chosen saints. And it's like, no big deal, And that's what, and Lord Summerisle, is he really the villain? I mean, some would call him the antagonist of the movie, but he's not a straight out villain. He's doing what he thinks is best for his people.
Yeah, I mean,
even though it's murder. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that Howie throws it back into his face. What if the crops fail? Because this is all because their crops are horrible. Right. I mean, they're known. I mean, again, the part that was cut from the beginning was when the police officers are munching on an apple that came from Summerisle. Mm. It's known for their lush vegetables and fruit, their apples, and their crops have failed, and they were horrible crops. That's why they offer a sacrifice of a man of the king, a lawman of the king, and who happens to be a virgin. That was the perfect sacrifice. And Christopher Lee, Lord Summerisle, thinks that this will save his people, his crops. But Howie throws it back into his face. What if the crops fail this year? What happens then? And you'll have to offer yourself up as a sacrifice next year, Lord Summerisle. And you see it quickly for like a split second on Christopher Lee's face, like, oh crap, he could be right. That's what I like. It's very quick. Yeah. But he's like, I'm confident it will, Yeah. Big booming voice. But yeah, it was interesting how the 102-minute cut, Roger Corman had it. They found it. They forgot I don't think they told Robin Hardy that they shipped it to Roger Corman's people. So they had to do some digging around for it. because Roger Corman had offered to distribute the film, and I guess his editor held on to the print. Roger Corman thought, they had to make certain cuts to make it better. So it's like, there's so many cuts of this film. There's so many different cuts. But before we talk about the cuts, let's talk about the music, because the music is, again, just as important. And you had Peter Giovanni, who I think he had he had a folk background, but he had the task of taking and making these folk songs sound like they came from Scotland. Mm-hmm. And the guy's not Scottish,
right?
So the music is just so brilliant, and I know that he doesn't get credit, but Anthony Schaffer's brother is Peter Schaffer, mm-hmm. the guy who went on to famously write Amadeus, the screenplay for that. So the guy had more of a musical background, and Peter Schaffer actually helped Giovanni come up with the lyrics for the song too. Mm-hmm. From my understanding of just listening to the commentary, Peter Schaffer helped his brother come up with the song lyrics. And there's always, when there's no speaking, the music definitely drives along the plot. The whole maypole sequence, the girls in there keeping rhythm with it and everything like that. But so Christopher Lee did everything he could. It's funny. He did. It seemed like he did. Most of the legwork for trying to get this movie made, because I know when it was showcased around America, he was part of that. Mm-hmm. He was, and people were shocked to see him there. You know what I mean? But he actually, because there's a lot of religious aspects of the movie, Christopher Lee showed the version to the men of the church, and they liked it for the most part.
Oh wow! Yeah,
because virtue does triumph in a way. For the most part.
For the most part, yeah.
He becomes a martyr.
Yeah.
That kind of thing they liked, the Christian followers liked, is the fact that the guy, he is saved at the end. Mm-hmm. He is saved. But what a way to end a movie, though, huh?
Yeah, not a happy ending. Not a happy ending.
But now there was a sequel that was written by Anthony Schaffer, believe it or not. How he was alive in the sequel. They didn't really talk about it in the commentary. And there's a 4K on the new 4K that was just released by Studio Canal to honor the 50th anniversary. On the 4K disc, which I haven't seen yet because I don't have a 4K player, they actually have some of the lost screenplay of the ending.
Oh wow!
The original ending, which they didn't really allude to too much in the 2003 commentary. All they said that Howie was alive in the sequel.
He must have been hurting.
Right. Again, they didn't delve too much into it. And if I had access to a 4K player, it would have been interesting to do a dive into, because Robin Hardy had a whole not sequel, but a different ending. But apparently Anthony Schaffer, the screenwriter, did have a sequel written.
Wow.
I don't know if Christopher Lee was really interested in that or not. They didn't really comment too much about it. Mm-hmm. I don't think they wanted to, which makes it even more interesting because it's mysterious. I kind of, as a fan of the film, would love to, at least to see the screenplay.
Right.
See what Anthony Schaffer had.
Yeah, I think if Christopher Lee wasn't really saying much about it, given how much he invested into the first one, it probably wasn't anything he had any interest in doing.
Well, and I don't blame him. I really, you can't take, in my opinion, you can't take this movie and duplicate it.
Right.
You can pay homage to it. Mm-hmm. Like Hot Fuzz famously, Edgar Wright's a huge fan of the movie. I don't know if you ever saw Hot Fuzz.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so many similarities. he loved the Wicker Man, and he uses, and Edward Woodward is actually in Hot Fuzz, which was interesting. And I really don't want to talk too much about the awful, abysmal remake, but an interesting thing of note, since the commentary on the Blu-ray I was watching was back in 2003, mm-hmm. They were talking about Anthony Schaffer. I think actually Peter Schaffer actually they were working together to try to adapt it into a stage play, a musical.
Oh, that's cheerful.
Yeah, that would have been a cheerful musical, all right. Imagine watching that on Broadway. I mean, the sets would have been amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I assume it would be. Thankfully, it didn't come to fruition. Again, I just don't know how you can take this and do it again. But Christopher Lee mentioned in the commentary that he was offered, I don't know if reprise his role, but to have some sort of role with Nicolas Cage. He mentioned Nicolas Cage, so Nicolas Cage was attached to it the whole time. It was not that good. You saw the
yeah,
sequel,
I saw when it first came out.
The remake.
Yeah, I saw when it first came out, and
it was just terrible.
Yeah, forgot about it just as quickly. It was in the time where everything was being remade. That's all Hollywood was interested in. You had the handful that were actually really good, and then you had the ones that just sucked, and this was in the latter category.
We just watched Thanksgiving with Eli Roth, and Eli Roth listens to that soundtrack. He has it everywhere on every musical platform because, I mean, the music is just the fact that Giovanni helped. He worked with both Hardy and Schaffer, researching into this whole folk traditional stuff. And I mean, the guy wasn't a Scottish guy. None of these people were Scottish. It was just amazing how they were able to take and respect the culture and kind of make it into their own. A movie that, unfortunately, I would have loved it if Christopher Lee had found all of the missing parts of the movie. Yeah. Because, I mean, we mentioned 3 cuts that are available on home video. There was the 87-minute theatrical cut, and then the 99-minute director's cut, which they kind of falsely put on streaming, 102-minute cut. And then you have the final 94-minute cut, which is actually the one Robin Hardy liked the most, apparently.
Wow.
He did like the director's cut back in 2003, but when they redid it for the 40th anniversary, the final cut, they call it, the Wicker Man, the final cut, that's the one that Robin Hardy himself liked the best. And it's the one that's the most accessible right now. I'm surprised they didn't have that version on the streaming. There's also a 95-minute cut. I mean, there's like several other unofficial cuts for the movie. It's like, man, there are 20 cans of film, Christopher Lee said, and how can all of that go missing?
Well, I mean,
he can't prove there was any conspiracy.
Yeah.
He thinks there is. He wishes he could prove it, but he thinks they might have been mislabeled on purpose, and it just really crushed Christopher Lee. It really did.
And again, as we talked about, Frankenstein and Universal Studios a couple months ago. There's always a convenient fire when you need it.
Right. And you don't know if it was burned or, I mean, Christopher Lee still thinks it's out there. He doesn't think it was burned. Mm-hmm. He really thinks it's out there somewhere. It's just a shame that there's we can count thousands of instances. Like there was the movie Greed made back in the 1920s. There was like a 12-hour cut of that. Mm-hmm. You can't really find it. I think there's 4.5 hours. That's it.
Yeah.
Back when movies were actually long and they were okay to be long.
Right.
Napoleon from 1927. Francis Ford Coppola has a 4.5-hour cut. And then Ken Browning in England had a 5.5-hour cut. And I think just 4 years ago, they found the full 7.5-hour cut.
Oh, wow.
But I think there's even longer cuts of that movie.
Jeez.
So it's like
7.5 hours.
Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles' second film, 88 minutes were cut, thrown away. No one can find it. And I think Wicker Man should be up there as amongst one of the tragedies of cut film that no one can find. How much was it cut? We don't know.
Right.
I honestly don't think Robin Hardy knows because Robin Hardy just directed the movie. He doesn't own the movie.
Yeah.
Peter Snell and the studios owned it. Studio Canal owns it, and I think some sort of distribution rights Lionsgate does. What is in those missing scenes? I know Christopher Lee alluded to it. I don't know if you remember Howie eating a bit of an apple. Mm-hmm. Apparently, there was this whole sequence. They were eating apples together.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lot of witty dialogue, Christopher Lee says, and that's gone. This movie is one of the best films I've ever seen, and even if any other longer cut wouldn't be as good, I still would like to see it just to satisfy my curiosity. Wicker Man, it's timeless. I mean, I could go on and on about it. Taking a look at the different releases, the first restoration was done during the mid-1970s. I don't know if you're aware of this one, Adam.
No.
Hardy made inquiries about the film, hoping to restore it to its original vision, along with, of course, Christopher Lee, Schaffer. Hardy searched for the original cut or raw footage. Both of them appeared to have been lost, as we've mentioned. You ever heard of Alex Cox? Remember that guy? Repo Man?
Oh, okay, yep.
Man said in one of the introductions back in 1988 that the negative had ended up in the pylons that support M4 motorway.
Okay.
Yeah. A motorway that goes from West London to Southwest Wales. I guess it ended up there, according to Alex Cox, but Hardy recalled that a copy of the film made prior to Dealey's cuts, as we've mentioned, Roger Corman had a 102-minute cut. Hardy was able to restore the narrative structure, some of the erotic elements which had been excised, and a very brief pre-title segment of Howie on the mainland, that 96-minute restored version. Again, we were talking about the different, there's 99 minutes, there's 94 minutes, 87 minutes, 95, 96. And in the U.S., the VHS had the original 99-minute version, Media Home Entertainment, later Magnum. This was the only way to watch it in the United States on VHS back in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, the video included additional early scenes set inside Howie's police station, which Hardy left out of the 1979 restoration. And then in 2001, a remaster of the 88-minute cut, and that was released on VHS, labeled as
Was it worth the money?
Yeah, I don't know. So the director's cut in 2001, Canal Plus tried to release the full-length film. Corman's copy had been lost, but a type of transfer to 1-inch videotape existed. Missing elements were combined with the film elements from the previous versions. Howie on the mainland, they were restored, showing him to be the object of gossip at the police station. They made fun of the guy. You get all of Howie's intentions when he first lands. He comes out of the dinghy and he's kind of insulting to the townspeople.
Yeah.
That's the way he was on the mainland. Anyways, they were restored, like the DVD cut. Anchor Bay actually had that one. They call it the 99-minute hybrid. It was the longest and closest version to Hardy's original 100-odd minute version, the one that Roger Corman had. There was a 2-disc limited edition set that was sold with the shortened theatrical release, extended version, and a documentary, which the Wicker Man Enigma, which is now on the Blu-ray cuts and everything like that now. In 2005, Inside the Wicker Man author Alan Brown revealed he had discovered stills that were taken on set showing sequences from the script that had never been seen before. This is 2005. I'm not sure if you've seen them, Adam. Have you seen any of these stills?
No.
I haven't either, but apparently they include Howie. He closes a mainland pub, open after hours. He encounters a prostitute, has a massage from Willow. So she actually did touch him, according to some of these. You wish those versions were available. So Willow apparently gave him a massage in these. And
Go Sergeant.
And he sees a brutal confrontation between Oak, the big dude there?
Yep.
Oak and a villager in the Green Man, which were featured in a revised edition. You kind of see him, he kind of pushes them out of the way in the long cut that you saw. So Anchor Bay released a limited edition wooden box of the Wicker Man. About 50,000 2-disc sets were made. I never saw them, but 20 were signed by Lee and Woodward, Schaffer, Snell, and Hardy. All this leads to the 2003 release of the Wicker Man, which had, again, the 87-minute version and the 99-minute version. Then fast forward 10 years. Studio Canal began a Facebook campaign in 2013 to find missing material, which culminated in the discovery of a 92-minute 35mm print. Right. This time, I guess it was at the Harvard Film Archive. Now, the print apparently had previously been known as the middle version and was itself assembled from a 35mm print of the original edit Robin Hardy had made back in 73, but which was never released. Hardy believed that original edit will probably never be found. He said, sadly, it seems as though this has been lost forever. However, he says, I'm delighted that a 1979 Abraxas print has been found, as I put together this cut myself, and it crucially restores the story to which I had originally intended. So Hardy reported back in July of 2013 that Studio Canal intended to release the most complete version possible. It was like a new digital restoration. September 27th, 2013 was the release day, and it was 91 minutes long, shorter than the director's cut, but longer than the theatrical cut. And it's the final cut, the one that's the most famous one. And then the final cut Blu-ray features a bunch of different stuff on there. But yeah, as I said, I'm proud to own the one that Imprint released over in Australia, a new label over there. It has all 3 cuts of the film, has the soundtrack on it. Then a year later, I should have waited, because a year later, Studio Canal released their own limited edition set with all of them in 4K and on Blu-ray. So there's like a 6-disc set, and that went like that.
Wow.
It literally had a greeting card, "Welcome to Summer Isle." It had like a little greeting card on it, which is kind of interesting. I look at it, I mean, it had a booklet and stuff like that, but pretty happy with the imprint version I have. And of course, you probably can't get either the imprint or the Studio Canal limited edition set, but you can get the 4K and the Blu-ray of The Wicker Man, the final cut, which is the most popular one. Again, I'm surprised the streaming platform you watch it on didn't have that one.
No, and it was the only Vudu. It was the only streaming platform that it was on.
Well, it's interesting. I know Tubi sometimes gets a hold of certain ones too, but there's just so many different cuts of this movie. No matter how you watch it, I highly encourage you to watch it. And if you haven't seen the different cuts, if you love this film at all, if you love it as much as I do, you've probably seen them already, watch them again. There's just so much to enjoy. Again, it's not an easy movie to just sit down and watch. I think you've noted that before. The ending just really throws you through a big loop.
It sure does. It sure does.
It's a powerful film. Again, one of the greatest films I've ever seen. It's in my top 250, and I know you really liked it too, didn't you, Adam?
Yeah. If I'm giving it a ranking, I'm giving it at least like a 3.8. So something I'll revisit again, something I enjoyed. If I had to put it in like a top 10 list, it probably doesn't quite make the top 10 list, but it's still something that I enjoyed and would revisit over and over.
Yeah, it's near my top of horror films, that's for sure, and it's definitely in my top 250. And easy, if we were to rate it 10 stars, I'd give it 10 or 11, 15, 20. Whatever the highest rating you can give for a movie, I'd give The Wicker Man. Christopher Lee said it was the greatest British movie he'd ever seen. Maybe he was biased. It's hard to argue that. I mean, there's so many great British films, so many great films worldwide, but Wicker Man stands among them, in my opinion.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reals.